It's good to see all of you here this morning for our Sunday morning Bible class. We hope that you had a good week last week. It seems like it will be a very beautiful day today, so we look forward to the weather, and we're so thankful that you are here if you're a visitor. And we're going to invite your attention to the book of Matthew this morning, and we want to continue in chapter 1 and then move on into chapter 2 today. There was a man, he came to the preacher and he said, I feel very worthless most of the time. He said, I just am so hard on myself. Well, the preacher thought for a second and he said, I want to show you a picture of something here. He said, this is my dog. My dog is very obedient. In fact, he's one of the best dogs I've ever had. That dog is so smart, I will tell him in the morning to go get the paper and bring it back, and he will bring it to me. He never has an accident in the house. He is a very faithful, good, obedient dog. Then he said, here is my son. He's 5 years old. He's very disobedient sometimes. He throws fits. He cries and whines. But which one do you think is more important to me? You see, the man understood what the preacher was trying to tell him. God thinks that humans are the most important part of His creation. Now, if there's any lesson that you learn from the book of Matthew, it would be that. God is interested in mankind. In fact, let's read Matthew chapter 1, verses 18 through 21. If you're there, we'll just pick up in the book of Matthew chapter 1. And if you have that, will you please read it for us? Okay, God is interested in humanity. That's the key to this book. Okay? Now, there's several other keys we're going to talk about as we move on, but it's interesting to me, you'll notice even in verse 23, when he quotes Isaiah the prophet, he said, a virgin shall conceive and bear a son and shall call his name Emmanuel, which means what? God is with us. That's one of the keys to the whole book. God is interested in mankind, even though of all the creation, humans are the only ones who are disobedient. You ever thought about that? A giraffe can't disobey God. But God is not interested in saving giraffes. He's interested in saving mankind. So that's sort of the thrust and the idea of this book. All right, now, there are lots of things that we notice in chapter 1. Now, the genealogy is what's mentioned here a little bit earlier. Okay, so there's a lot of names. Is the genealogy in Matthew different from the genealogy in Luke? You think, well, I don't know. I don't study genealogies. That's the most boring study I've ever had. It is boring. But there's a reason why these names are here. Why did God tell us about all of these names? Well, I will give you a hint that the genealogy in Matthew and the genealogy in Luke are different. You say, well, is the Bible contradicting itself? Well, no. Let me tell you why this is happening, and I'll mention it in just a moment. Okay, now, we talked about some women mentioned in the genealogy. Do you remember who they were? There are 4 of them. Tamar, Ruth, Bathsheba, and a woman from Jericho. Starts with an R. Rahab. That's right. Okay. So we got 4 women in the genealogy. Now, why is that significant? Do we normally see women mentioned in Jewish genealogies? Never. It's amazing that God mention these women, especially with some of their backgrounds. You know, Rahab was a prostitute before. It's interesting to me, though, that she is a great-great-grandmother of David. That's pretty neat, isn't it? In fact, she married, I want to make sure I have this right. I talked about it Sunday. It's mentioned here in verse 5. Salmon was the father of Boaz by Rahab. So Rahab was Boaz's mama. Was Boaz a good man or a bad man? He was good, wasn't he? In fact, he married Ruth. Okay? So, how would you like to know, and for everyone else to know in the community, that your mama was a prostitute before? That's pretty something, isn't it? It's amazing to me, though, that God reveals the bad and the good in the Bible. He doesn't keep any secrets. Okay? But there are women mentioned in the genealogy. Now, we're going to talk about some generations just for a moment before I go into chapter 2. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this, okay? But I'll give you some short explanations and then we'll move on. In the genealogy mentioned in the book of Matthew, you'll notice in verse 1, he says, the book of the genealogy of Jesus Christ, the son of David. Notice, the son of who? Abraham. So Matthew's genealogy does not begin all the way at the beginning at Adam. It begins at Abraham. Now Luke's genealogy goes all the way back to Adam. Okay, that's what makes it a little bit different. But at any rate, I included this just for kicks. When I was in the school of preaching, we had to memorize the generations from Adam to Noah and then from Noah to Abraham. Now I probably couldn't name these in order today. I might could get a few, but there are 10 generations from Adam to Noah and then 10 generations from Noah to Abraham. Okay, so you've got a lot that happened before Matthew chapter 1 and verse 1. But Luke, he included some of that in the genealogy of Jesus. Now, this is the genealogy, of course, of Abraham. Okay? Right here. It begins here and goes this way. Okay? I probably should have put Abraham there and went this way, but just picture it. That's the genealogy of Abraham right here. Okay? And that's what's mentioned in the book of Matthew. But then you have the genealogy of Luke, which is a little bit longer. Okay? All right? Now, this is significant because of something that happens in this genealogy. Now, and I'll show it to you right here. Okay? At David, Matthew used Solomon as his family tree for Jesus Christ. But on Luke's account, he used his son Nathan. So you've got the same Jesus coming from the same family, but through different sons. Now, this is significant because Matthew's genealogy is about Joseph. Luke's genealogy is about Mary. That's the mother and the father of Jesus. So here's what I think happened. Now, there's a lot of details that you can spend hours and hours and hours talking about, okay? But I'm not a genealogy study type person. That's just not what I'm interested in. But here's what I found. Jesus Christ in the Bible is called the King of Kings and the Lord of Lords. If there were kings on the throne in Jerusalem when Jesus came, if they were still from the Old Testament all the way down to the New Testament, Jesus would be on that throne. He literally came from a royal family. Okay, you think about it. He's the son of David. The problem was at Jeconiah, which is the last king in the land of Judah. In the Old Testament, God said, not another king will reign on this throne in this family. They went into Babylonian captivity. The kings were done. But their family was still royal. Even though they went into captivity, they're still a royal family. So whether you trace Jesus Christ's lineage from Mary's family or Joseph's family, he is still king from both of them. Now that's amazing. Blows my mind. Mary and Joseph both come from a royal line. Matthew mentions Joseph's royal line. Luke mentions Mary's royal line. So, anyway, you could find some books on that. You can look online. You can do your own study as far as that goes. I'm not going to spend a lot of time there. We've noticed a lot of those names last time we were here. So I'm going to move on into chapter 2 today. Are there any question or comment before we move on? Right. I want to notice this before I go to chapter 2. We just read in Matthew chapter 1 and verse 23 that it says, "They shall call his name Emmanuel," which means God with us. Now Matthew is writing to a Jewish audience. Okay, most likely this book is either written in the Hebrew or Aramaic language. Why would he be interpreting what that means? It's pretty deep, isn't it? If you do a little study about the Hebrew language, you'll find that the Hebrew language almost went dormant. It was almost non-existent. Because of a Jewish man named Ben Yehuda, he brought the Hebrew language back. If it were not for him, it would be a dead language. Now, what do you think is happening as far as the Hebrew language goes in the first century? What do you think is replacing it? The Greek language. Thanks to Alexander the Great, he conquered all the known world at that time. You would find people in Africa who were speaking Greek. Okay, you would find people in Asia who were speaking Greek. I mean, the Greek language was everywhere. It was taking over the world, much like the English language is doing today. Okay? So what you'll have is people who are brought up Hebrew who do not even speak Hebrew. They are Jewish by nature and by heritage. They know the Old Testament backward and forward. But if you ask them to read it in the Hebrew language, they would not be able to. They would be reading it from the Septuagint, which is a Greek translation of the Old Testament. Okay? It was translated before the time of Jesus. That's what they would be reading from. So it's amazing that you'll find little nuggets like this in the Bible. You know, this is why the apostle wrote it this way. This is why he said, they will call his name Emmanuel, and then he told them what that means, because they wouldn't know what it means if he didn't tell them. It means God is with us. And that's what this book is about. All right. So let's start noticing in chapter 2 how God came into the world through a baby, Jesus Christ. All right. There was one little child. She was asked in Bible class, she said, her teacher said, "Who was the mother of Jesus?" And she said, "I think it was either the King James Virgin or the Virgin Mary." Well, children don't always understand, but this is one of the most exciting stories if you think about it. This is the beginning of history. When Jesus is being born, he comes to the world and brings hope to mankind, which hope had not been seen yet. This is the beginning of a wonderful era, the era of Jesus Christ. Now, the Bible says in Galatians 4:4 that in the fullness of time, God sent forth his Son, made of a woman, made under the law. You know what that tells me? God sent him at just the right time. Perfect timing is what we're reading here in Matthew chapter 2. Now, what are some events, before we begin, what are some events that are surrounding Jesus' birth that are a little bit dangerous? King Herod. Man, I just realized I left my paper at home. Oh, no. That's not good. Anyway, I'll just have to go by memory on some of it. But I printed out this printout about King Herod and how wicked he was. And anyway, I'll mention some of it today. You can do your own research on that, but we'll talk a little bit about him. Okay, let's begin. Matthew chapter 2, verses 1 and 2. Will somebody read that for us?
After Jesus was born in Bethlehem of Judea, in the days of Herod the king, behold, wise men from the east came to Jerusalem, saying, Where is he who has been born King of the Jews? For we have seen his star in the east and have come to worship.
All right. So there's a lot of information there. I'm not going to notice every little detail, but there are some good things here. But notice it says, now after Jesus was born in Bethlehem of Judea in the days of Herod the king. What about this Bethlehem? Does everybody believe that Jesus was born in Bethlehem? I guess I wish I would have brought this too, but I have a Book of Mormon in my office. And there are two main scriptures that I might bring that next time, and I'll read them to you from the Book of Mormon. It says that Jesus was born in Jerusalem. But then I can turn over to another one that I have marked, and it says, Blessed is he who disregards the mistakes found in this book. That's a word-for-word quote. Why in the world would I study from a book that admits it has mistakes? You see, Jesus was prophesied to be born in Bethlehem. Jesus was not prophesied to be born in Jerusalem. You know, that's one of the things that I know this book is from God and not man because of the fulfillment of prophecies. Other books cannot do what the Bible can do. And the Bible from long ago said that he would be born in Bethlehem, and we'll read about that in just a moment. Now, let's pay attention to something else here. It says, now after Jesus was born in Bethlehem of Judea in the days of Herod the king. Okay, let's talk about Herod the king for a minute. He was a king that was set up in Judea by the Romans. Okay? He knew a lot about Jewish people. He knew a lot about Jewish culture. And the Romans said, we want you to be our puppet and rule over those people that you know so well. Well, Herod was like many other Roman rulers. He was a murderer. He killed anybody that was a threat to him. He killed his own wife. He killed his wife's brother. He killed his wife's children. Totaling up into at least 20 people probably he murdered that were directly associated with him. Now there are some other people he killed. Who else did he kill that we know of that tells us in Matthew chapter 2? Little babies. All the newborn baby boys in the area where Jesus was born, he killed every single one of them. Now, why do you think he was like that? What made him do that?
He's trying to make sure he killed Jesus.
Okay, yeah, he's trying to make sure he killed Jesus, but why was he so interested in killing Jesus, and why was he so interested in killing these people around him? What do you think he was afraid of? That's right. He's afraid somebody's going to take the throne away from him. And he knew that Jewish people were calling Jesus a king. He said, not in my house. There's not going to be another king around here, and I'm going to make sure of it. So he killed all those people that he thought were a threat to his throne that were around him, including innocent, newborn little baby boys. Now, there was another character in the Bible who did that. Do you remember who it was? Way, way back. The Pharaoh of the Old Testament. In Exodus chapters 1 and 2. He tried to kill all the little babies, specifically the Hebrew baby boys. And one of them survived. He was found in a river. His name was Moses. You see, this is nothing new. This man was crazy. In fact, as he got older, it was worse and worse and worse. And he failed to commit suicide. He tried to commit suicide, but as a result of that, he had a lot of problems, and he did end up finally dying. But at any rate, he was a madman. You'll read about another Herod in Matthew chapter 14. Now, this is different, okay? This is a different man. Although he's called Herod, he's a Herod the Tetrarch of Galilee. This is a totally different individual. So I put this on here. I don't want you to be confused by that. Herod the Great, he only lived probably a year or two after Jesus was born. Okay, about 67 BC to about 3 or 4 AD is whenever he was alive. Okay, he was from Edom. He was born in Edom, and he died in Jericho. All right, so anyway, this man is different. And you'll read about Herods in the book of Acts. These are different individuals, okay? That's not the same man. So you have to know the time frame of what's going on here. He's called Herod the Tetrarch. And he says he heard about the fame of Jesus, and he said to his servants, this is John the Baptist. But he was wrong about that. It's not John. He's been raised from the dead. That is why these miraculous powers are at work for him. Now, why did Herod say, this is John the Baptist come back from the dead? What had Herod done?
He's the one who had him killed.
He's the one who had him killed. He had John the Baptist beheaded while he was in prison. Okay, so this is a totally different man. All right. You'll read also in Luke chapter 23, verses 8 through 12, when Jesus was arrested, and Pilate, he said, I have found no fault in him. Send him to Herod. And that's what they did. The Jewish Sanhedrin, they took Jesus bound, and they brought him to Herod the Tetrarch of Galilee, and they began to mock Jesus and bow down in front of him and laugh at him while they're drinking and partying and having a good time. And they said, are you really a king? You don't look like a king to me. They accused him. Herod with his soldiers treated him with contempt. They mocked him. They arrayed him in splendid clothing and sent him back to Pilate. They said, here, you need some better clothes if you say you're going to be a king. Well, this is a different individual than what you read about in the early part of Matthew 2. All right. There was a guy who said to his wife, he said, you know, I was such a fool when I married you. She said, I know, but I was too blind to see how much of a fool you really were. Herod was a very foolish man, Herod the Great. In fact, there were other Herods who were very foolish. And at any rate, you read about one in the book of Acts who murdered James, and the Bible says he was eaten with worms. His gut was eaten with worms. And he was struck dead by God. Well, Herods were usually not very good. All right, now let's keep on reading here. It says here, after Jesus was born in Bethlehem of Judea in the days of Herod the king, who came from the east? Some wise men, right? How many were there? Yeah, yeah, that's right. Everybody says the 3 wise men, right?
Nope.
No? Does the Bible say 3?
Nope.
No, but we always say that, don't we? We say 3 wise men. We even have a song about the 3 wise men. Well, we just really don't know how many there are, but I will tell you this. It does make sense because there were 3 gifts. What were they? Frankincense, gold, and myrrh. Okay. So we really don't know, but, that's not a big deal, I don't guess. You won't go to hell for saying there were 3 wise men. Okay. Yeah. Yeah, it's not a big deal. But at any rate, just something to pick out there. Where's the east? What do you think's over there? They came to Jerusalem to find out where Jesus would be born, right? They knew this is the headquarters of the Hebrew people, so They came to Jerusalem first, and they're going to meet with Herod the king, and they're going to say, well, where's Jesus being born? And he didn't know. He said, I want you to go find him for me. But most likely, these men are from Persia. Okay? I would say probably in the area of Babylon, which is Chaldea. All right? There was a man in the Old Testament who was from Ur of the Chaldees. You remember his name? Abraham. I have heard that the cube, studying the cube, was invented in Ur of the Chaldees. It's pretty neat. So you think people were walking around with clubs and grunting back then? That's not true. All right? No, they've never done that. Humans have never done that. They've always been very, very smart. In fact, they still cannot figure out how in the world those Egyptians built those pyramids. They can't figure it out. Well, I'll tell you, I don't know exactly how, but I knew a little bit how. Humans are smart. Okay? They can figure out stuff. And people were smart even back in Abraham's day. All right. So we've got these wise men, these born in Bethlehem. We've talked about Herod the king. Now notice, it says they came from the east, and they say, where is he that is born the King of the Jews? For we saw his star when it arose, and we have come to worship him. When Herod the king heard this, he was troubled, and all Jerusalem with him. Now, we talked a little bit about this already. Why do you think he was troubled? Because Jesus is called King. Okay, so I won't go over that again, but I will tell you this. This has been prophesied even in the Old Testament. Jacob was the leader of the 12 tribes of Israel, and he is dying. And he goes to each of his sons, and he blesses them in Genesis 49. He's an old man. And the Bible says he's leaning on his staff, and he tells each of them what will happen in their future. He comes to Judah, and he said, the scepter shall not depart from Judah, nor a lawgiver from between his feet until Shiloh come. Okay, that word Shiloh, it literally means tranquility. Okay? And unto him, the reason why they know to capitalize Shiloh is because, talking about him, unto him shall the gathering of the people be. Okay, there's a lawgiver that's going to come from Judah. And people will gather down to the tribe of Judah, and they will bow down. And guess what tribe Jesus is from? From the tribe of Judah. The royal family of Judah. All right? Now, I'm trying to get my bearings here, try to figure out where I am. All right. Let's go to Isaiah chapter 9. Isaiah chapter 9. Think about a story when there were some country fellas talking, and one of them said to his friend, he said, you know, there are firemen in the Bible. And his friend didn't believe him. He said, firemen? That's something new. That wasn't in the Bible. His friend said, oh yeah, buddy, I tell you what. He said, there are firemen in the Bible. Said right there in the book of Matthew, those wise men came from afar. Well, I think they came from a long distance, all right, not from a fire. So let's think about why they're come to worship this king. You know, I'll be honest with you, I think the Jewish religion had spread so far that these men heard about Jesus being born, and they knew this is the one who will be born that the Old Testament talked about. All right, will somebody read Isaiah chapter 9, verses 6 and 7?
For unto us a child is born, unto us a son is given, and the government will be upon his shoulder, and his name will be called Wonderful. Where am I at?
You're still sitting right there.
Everlasting Father, Prince from of this increase of his government and peace, there will be no end, until the throne of David and over his kingdom, in order it established with judgment and just, for that time forward, even forever. The zeal of the Lord of hosts will perform this.
Okay. Thank you for reading that.
Sorry reading.
Oh, no, you're fine. You're fine. You're doing good. So, we've got this Christ who is to be born, and they said, we've heard about this one, and we want to worship him. Now, I'm thinking in my mind, how in the world do they know so much about this? But you keep reading in the book of Matthew, you look at verse 5. Now, I'm going to make a big point here for the book of Matthew. So stay with me. Verse 5, it says, they said to him, in Bethlehem of Judea, for what? This was written by the prophets. Now, it's interesting to me, you're going to find this phrase over and over and over in the book of Matthew. Now, you remember when we started the class, the reason why he is writing. To show mankind that God is writing to show mankind he is interested in them. In fact, he said, God is with us. Okay, verse 23. Emmanuel means God is with us. So let's look just for a second. It was written by the prophet. You look in verse 15. And there was until the death of Herod, that it might be fulfilled which was spoken by the Lord by the prophet. Verse 17, then this was filled which was spoken by Jeremy the prophet. That's Jeremiah, by the way. Chapter 3, verse 3. For this is he that was spoken by the prophet Isaiah, saying, the voice of one crying in the wilderness. You look at chapter 4, verse 14. That it might be fulfilled which was spoken by Isaiah the prophet. This is going to go on and on and on in the book of Matthew. Matthew's goal is to show the people this is the one of the Old Testament. Jesus is the one. So, he's convincing this Jewish audience who has been departing from their culture. It's time to come back. This is him. The one that you read about in the Holy Scriptures of old. Okay? So, that's really the message of chapter 2. You know, why is Jesus being born? Why do we read about this account? All right, you remember, in fact, I'll just notice one more very quickly. You go back to chapter 1. Even in chapter 1, you'll find this. Chapter 1 and verse 22. Now all this was done that it might be fulfilled, which was spoken by the Lord by the prophet. Say. So what I have done is, in mine, I went and highlighted those, okay? Just so I know every time you see that in Matthew, you know, this is the point. This is the point he's trying to make. That Jesus is the prophet from the Old Testament.
Well, that star that they followed, it had to have been a special kind of star, or something.
I would think so, yeah.
And they had been told to look for this particular star.
Yeah. Yeah, there is something special about that star. The Bible doesn't say a whole lot about it, though, but yes, I do believe that. We sing a song, Beautiful Star of Bethlehem. That's a pretty good song, isn't it? I like that song. But at any rate, yes, that is a special star, and you're going to find this phrase over and over. You know, look for where the star is, basically, is the fulfillment of prophecy. All right? For instance, he was born in Bethlehem is one of these prophecies. Now, I got about 3 minutes, so I'm just going to go through this last part pretty quickly. But the prophecy mentioned there in chapter 2, let's see, find my place here. Verse 5, they told the wise men in Bethlehem of Judea, for so it is written by the prophet, and then he quotes Micah 5:2. Okay, and you, Bethlehem, in the land of Judah, are by no means least among the rulers of Judah, for from you shall come a ruler who will shepherd my people Israel. So you've got this idea then of the ruler coming from Bethlehem. This is very significant because Bethlehem is a little bitty old town. It's like saying that the president was born in Ripley, Mississippi. You know, it's such a small place compared to all the towns in the United States. Well, Bethlehem is like that. It's a little bitty village farm town. And they're known for making bread and grain. In fact, Bethlehem means, does anybody know what it means? It means house of bread. Okay? So they're known for their grains and their bread making in Bethlehem. So nothing famous about it. Now, it's about 6 miles from Jerusalem. Okay, so there's about 6 miles from there. And at any rate, Jesus was raised. Where was he raised? In Nazareth. Okay, as a young boy, they escaped Herod by going to Egypt. And then after they came back home from Egypt, they said it's not safe for us to be here, and they moved to Nazareth. That's where Jesus was raised. All right, I was going to read a lot of that, but we don't have time for that today. But I'll mention this. We've got about 2 minutes left. You're going to find this idea of Bethlehem. Okay, there were 2 Bethlehems. All right, but he's very specific in the prophecy. He said Bethlehem of Ephratah in Ephrath. Okay, that's in Judah. This other Bethlehem is in a different tribe. It belongs to a different tribe in the north. Okay, so Bethlehem of Judah in Ephrath is right there. You know, I know that's Ephrath because of Genesis 35. Rachel died and was buried on the way to Ephrath, which is Bethlehem. You see how the Bible fits together? It's very specific. And God fulfilled that prophecy. And at any rate, there are other prophecies mentioned even in Matthew chapter 2, which I'm done for now. I won't notice them, but we'll talk more about these next week, okay? Thank you so much for your attention today. I hope this book will help both of us, or all of us, as we study it. Thanks.